There are stories in history that feel almost too extraordinary to be true, tales that live somewhere between courage and miracle. But today, we're stepping into the life of a man who truly walked that line. A man who entered one of the most brutal battles of the Second World War without a single weapon to defend himself, yet he saved more lives than entire units combined. His name was Desmond Thomas Doss, and this is his story. Desmond was born in Lynchburg, Virginia in 1919. It was a small, sleepy place with rolling hills and quiet streets. But his childhood wasn't easy. His father, a carpenter, struggled with the trauma of serving in World War I, and that struggle often manifested as alcoholism. Fights between his parents were common, and money was always scarce. But even in that difficult environment, Desmond had something that many adults couldn't yet grasp: a deep, unwavering belief that life, every single life, mattered. In his home there was a framed illustration of the 10 Commandments. It showed Cain standing over the body of his brother Abel, and one commandment in particular stood out to young Desmond: "Thou shalt not kill." He would stare at that image day after day, his mind grappling with a question that would define his entire life. How could the world be so full of violence, and why did so many people surrender to it? That picture, he later said, became his personal law. Then one moment changed everything. When he was a teenager, a drunken argument between his father and his uncle escalated. Desmond watched in horror as his father pulled a gun on his own brother. In the chaos that followed, his mother managed to get the gun away from his father and told Desmond to hide it. As he ran from the house, clutching the cold, heavy steel, he made a promise to himself, a vow that would echo through the decades. He would never touch a weapon again. Not ever. When the Second World War erupted and the attack on Pearl Harbor shocked the nation, every able-bodied young man in America was expected to answer the call to fight. Desmond, a devout Seventh-day Adventist, was no different. He felt a profound duty to his country. He said, "While everyone else is doing their bit, I can't just stay behind and do nothing." He wanted to serve, to help, to be there for his fellow man. But he also refused to abandon his core belief. Taking a human life was something he knew he could never do. So, he found a loophole, a way to serve without violating his conscience. He enlisted in the United States Army as a conscientious objector, but with a specific request. He wanted to be a combat medic. To many, this seemed noble, a compromise between faith and duty. To the men in his unit, however, it looked like insanity. A soldier who wouldn't carry a rifle. A man who spent his Saturdays in prayer while others trained for battle. A recruit who refused to even touch a weapon, even during drills. They didn't understand him. And what people don't understand, they often fear or ridicule. They mocked him, calling him a holy roller and a coward. They taunted him, threw shoes at him while he prayed, and tried everything they could to get him kicked out of the army. They saw his refusal to carry a weapon not as a sign of conviction, but as a sign of weakness, a liability that would get them all killed. But Desmond stood his ground, ready to run headfirst into danger, just not to take a life. He was there to save them. It didn't take long for the bullying to turn into outright hostility. His commanders questioned his sanity and tried to have him discharged on the grounds of mental instability. His fellow soldiers ostracized him, hid his equipment, and in one instance tried to beat him up in the middle of the night. The pressure was immense. "Why don't you just go home, Doss?" they'd ask, their voices laced with frustration. "Why are you wasting everyone's time?" But Desmond's reply was always calm, always the same. "I just want to save lives, that's all." His refusal to carry a weapon led to a formal hearing, a court-martial that threatened to send him to prison for disobeying a direct order. The army brass saw him as a problem, a disruption to military order. But Desmond, with quiet determination, argued his case. He wasn't refusing to serve. He was simply asking to serve in a way that aligned with his beliefs. In the end, after a long and grueling struggle, the army reluctantly allowed him to stay weaponless. Under one specific condition: he would go to the front lines as a medic and treat the wounded, no matter the cost. Doss agreed without a moment's hesitation. His battle was won, but the war was just beginning. And then came Okinawa. Specifically, a towering, jagged cliff known as the Maida Escarpment. The soldiers had a different name for it: Hacksaw Ridge. It was one of the most savage and brutal battlegrounds of the entire Pacific War, a place where death seemed almost guaranteed. American soldiers had to climb 400-foot cargo nets to reach the top, all while under a constant barrage of machine gun fire and mortar shells. Men screamed as explosions tore the earth apart. Bodies fell like shadows, disappearing into the thick smoke of battle. Desmond climbed with them. In his hands he held no rifle, no bayonet, no grenades. All he had was his medic's bag and his unshakable faith. When the American forces reached the top, the fight was even more hellish than they imagined. The Japanese forces, deeply entrenched in a network of caves and tunnels, unleashed a furious counterattack. The American advance faltered, then broke. The order was given to retreat. As men scrambled back down the cargo nets, chaos reigned. The ridge was littered with the wounded, men torn apart by shrapnel, bleeding out, crying for their mothers, for a medic, for help. Most of the American troops who could move retreated down the cliff, but Desmond stayed, alone, on top of that bloody ridge, surrounded by enemy soldiers. No weapon, just his hands, his hammering heartbeat, and a quiet voice inside him whispering, "Go, save one more." And so he did. He crawled through the mud and chaos to the first wounded man, a soldier with devastating leg injuries. He dressed the wounds as best he could, then dragged him across the battlefield, bullets whizzing past his head. When he reached the edge of the cliff, he fashioned a special knot he'd practiced and tied a rope around the man, carefully lowering him down to safety. Then, he turned around and went back into the fire, and again, and again, and again. Through the night, through the constant threat of enemy patrols, through bullets, through explosions, through sheer bone-deep exhaustion. Some men he carried on his back. Others he dragged inch by painful inch as Japanese soldiers searched the area for survivors, sometimes passing just feet from where he lay, holding his breath. With each rescue, he would pray the same simple prayer, "Lord, please help me get one more." He wasn't thinking about the 75 he would eventually save. He was only thinking about the next one. Just one more. By the time the sun rose, a miracle had occurred on Hacksaw Ridge. Desmond Doss, the man they had called a coward, had single-handedly saved the lives of 75 of his comrades. To the very soldiers who once mocked him, who had thrown their boots at him, he became their guardian angel. After the war, Desmond Doss returned home a changed man. Not because of pride, but because of a profound sense of humility. He never took credit for his actions on that ridge. He always said, "I didn't save 75 men. God saved them. I was just the hands he used." For his incredible bravery, he became the first conscientious objector in American history to receive the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award. At the White House ceremony, President Harry S. Truman shook his hand and said, "I'm proud of you. You truly deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." Desmond never saw himself as a hero, but history does. And today, we remember him not just for what he did, but for why he did it. Because it's easy to fight with a weapon in your hand. It's what soldiers are trained to do. But it takes an extraordinary kind of courage to walk into the heart of danger armed with nothing but faith, conviction, and a boundless compassion for your fellow man. That is the legacy of Desmond Doss, the soldier who refused to kill but refused even more to let his brothers die alone. Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of incredible people from history. We'll see you in the next one.